Dollar Tree Jenga blocks are some of my favorite items to craft with, and today I've got a few ideas to share with you. This project is so easy to create. You're going to take 2 blocks and glue them end to end and make 17 sets just like this. Once the glue has a grip on the blocks, which doesn't take long with this wood glue super glue from Dollar Tree, glue the sets together to create a long rectangle. Next, I'm taking a glass test tube that I got from Michael's, and we're making a little propagation station. I ended up swapping this one out for a wider tube later on just because the plant I had put in it already has a good root system and it was just too big for that narrower tube. To attach the tube to the blocks, I'm using this leather ribbon that I have. I marked where I want the ribbon to go on the blocks and used my drill carefully so I don't break the blocks and drilled a hole on either side. You don't have to attach the tube this way though. You could also glue the leather or whatever you have to use directly to the glass and then glue that down on top of your blocks. But before I attach the tube, I stain the blocks using my Valspar antiquing glaze and a baby wipe. Then I added the leather to hold the glass tube and glued it down to the back. I still have the smaller tube here, but then I swapped it out for the wider one. And last, I added another piece of that leather ribbon as a hanger, and this project is complete. Dollar Tree wood items that we are going to be using for project number 1. I did forget to show those little cube wood pieces, but you'll see those here in just a second. So I'm starting out by removing that back from the picture frame. We don't need this, set that aside for another project, and then also removing those little clips that hold the picture in place. Then I'm taking my Jenga blocks, and here's where you can see those little wood cubes, and I laid everything out in like a lattice formation, or you could call them little X's if you want, and I glued everything together while it was still inside of these frames. And the reason I did that was to make sure after everything was glued together and then I paint everything, it's all going to fit snugly back together and I won't have to worry about any of my little parts shifting around and not being, if they got off by like a little centimeter or something, it wasn't going to fit back inside of this frame. So I'm using wood glue here and then a paintbrush, and I just smear it across the bottom piece of my Jenga block, add it to that little cube, and then I let everything dry. Now everything is going to get a light coat of my ivory colored chalk paint. I don't mind some of the wood grain peeking through, and then I'm gonna start gluing things together. So using my Starbond super glue, I'm taking one of those Dollar Tree planks and I'm adding it to the back of this picture frame. Then I'm taking another one, I cut it in half, and I'm gluing each half to the sides of another one of those planks. And we're gonna be creating a little box here. So this is the bottom and the sides, and then my 4th plank is going to be the front of it. So it has an opening at the top, and you'll see what I mean here in just a second. Next, I do take some of my my hot glue, and I'm gonna just run a bead along the seam on the inside of my box, and then take my silicone Dollar Tree spatula, smooth out that hot glue, and this is just gonna reinforce my box and make sure it's gonna stay held together. Next, everything is getting a coat of distressing. I thought I put a light distressing on this. I think I went a little heavier than I had intended to, but distressing is personal preference. However you like to distress, heavy, light, not at all, whatever you enjoy. Now we're going to add that little box onto the picture frame, so you can see how I'm gluing it here, and that's why we put that back on the back of the picture frame so that there would be a back to this little box as well. And then I'm gluing my little lattice piece into the frame as well, all with my Starbond super glue. Then I'm just gonna add in some floral foam. I topped it off with some sheet moss, added some greenery, and that was it for this one. Let me know what you think. first I'm taking my Star Bond super glue, and I started gluing 4 blocks together to make a long row. My Star Bond glue didn't really hold these together too well. It was more like absorbing into the wood. So I do end up switching over to my hot glue and using the Gorilla hot glue sticks, and that worked out just fine. I did want a bit more of a secure hold, but this ended up working out just fine for this project. And you're going to want to make 40 sets of 4 blocks each to create this project. So I'm taking this drum lampshade. It's a 5-inch lampshade that I got from Facebook Marketplace. I believe I got it for about $6. And then I'm also taking this embroidery hoop, which I got from Hobby Lobby. And this is a 10-inch size embroidery hoop. First, I'm going to take just a scrap piece of wood from my garage, place the lampshade on top, and then separating the embroidery hoops, I placed one on the bottom. Then we're going to start taking our tumbling tower block sticks, is what I'm going to call them, and we're going to start placing them around the lampshade and around the embroidery hoop. So I started out with one like on all 4 sides so that I could get everything attached. Again, I am just using my Gorilla hot glue stick, and here is an image of what we're actually making. It's a Scandinavian inspired lampshade, and they use more like paint stir sticks or like thin scrap wood, but I thought this would be really cool to make with the tumbling tower blocks or Jenga blocks, whichever you would like to call them. So I started hot gluing them both to my lampshade and then also to the bottom part of the embroidery hoop. For this second embroidery hoop, I did cut off a small portion of it so that it would be the same exact size as my first embroidery hoop, because the second one's always a little bit larger. But I'm going to flip my lampshade upside down now, and we're going to place that second embroidery hoop on the bottom, just like we did the first one, and we're going to repeat that same process. So we're going to start taking our tower block sticks, and we're going to place them right up against the ones that we had first attached, and do the same thing, attaching them to both the lampshade and to the embroidery hoop, just using our hot glue. And again, this worked out just fine. I don't know that this will hold up for long-term use, especially with this being a lamp, but we'll see. It's gonna work just fine for a decorative purpose. So here I am just going back and forth, placing all of my sticks around, and every time I would place my sticks going one direction, flip my lampshade over, place them going the opposite direction. And this really did not take long at all to create. Once I had all of my block sticks glued down in place, I am taking this Hema IKEA lamp cord kit. I'm not really sure what these are even called or how to pronounce IKEA names. I think we all struggle with that. But just attaching this to my lampshade, and that's it for this project. I absolutely love how this turned out. Now, the one I was inspired by on Pinterest was a lot larger, but I really love the size of this one that I made. It's still fairly large. If you think about it, a 10-inch embroidery hoop is still pretty big. But I have this hanging over top of my desk in my living room, and I just absolutely love the little accent. Project is pretty easy. I'm taking 3 square-shaped mirrors. I'm not sure where I got these ones from, but Dollar Tree does sell mirrors like this, or you can usually find them in a multi-pack inexpensively at IKEA or Walmart. But I'm placing them face down for now, so it's easier for you to see what I'm doing without that reflection. I'm creating a border with the Jenga blocks, and I wanted to make sure I could go all the way around the entire mirror surface without having to cut any of the blocks. That worked out for the outside, but then I wanted to add a row to cover where the mirrors meet, and I did have to cut down 2 blocks, 1 for each row. I tried using my miter shears to cut the block down, but since I have 0 hand strength, that wasn't working.
I actually got the block stuck on the blade somehow and I couldn't get it off or cut through it. So plan B, I got out the mini table saw. I love this saw, but man, I think I really need to play around with it some more. That small piece of the block just kept shooting right off and flying across the room. It was pretty forceful and kind of scary. Now we can start gluing everything together. I'm using this wood glue super glue that you can find at Dollar Tree. I love this glue. It starts to set up pretty quickly so you can keep on working, but also gives a much stronger bond than hot glue would. Next, I can add the mirror down on top of the blocks, and for this, I'm using E6000 to get a stronger hold. Before I add on those cross sections of the block, I wanted to add a little design to the mirrors. So I got out my rub-on transfers from IOD. This one is the Painterly Florals, and I'm going to use the pink roses. I cut out a couple of options and laid them out around the mirror. I love how easy it is to layer the IOD transfers. I've tried doing something similar with the Dixie Belle rub-on transfers, and they do not layer nearly as nicely. I had meant for the mirror to hang vertically, but I forgot about that when I was adding on the transfers, and I laid them out horizontally. It still looks super cute, but I wish I had remembered that part. It's really easy to add these rub-on transfers to the glass. You just peel off that backing and place it down wherever you want. All transfer books come with a burnishing stick, and you use this to rub over the transfer to apply them. You can see how beautifully the rose layered on top of the leaves on this section. The transfer looks like it came this way, like it is one cohesive piece. When I try to do this with the Dixie Belle transfers, you could see that leaf underneath of the flower, and it kind of changed the color of the flower where the leaf was under it. Once I had all the transfers on, I added the rest of the Jenga blocks to hide where those mirrors meet. And the last thing I did for this project was paint the frame. I was going back and forth debating if I wanted to paint it or leave it in the wood. I think the wood gave it a more contemporary look, while painting it gave it more of a shabby chic or cottagecore type of look. You could choose any color or stain you want for this part. I was pretty careful when adding the paint near the transfers, but for the rest of the frame, if I got it a little bit of the paint on the mirror, that's okay. It'll wipe right off with some water since the paint is water soluble. This project turned out so adorable. I am obsessed with it. I started out gluing 2 blocks end to end and then glued 2 more blocks directly on top to make all 4 sides the same width. And I made 4 sets just like this. Next, I'm taking a single block and adding it to the middle of the 4 block set. Then gluing all the pieces together to create a square. This is going to be the base for a little stool. Once the glue dries, I'm taking wood filler to make the sides look a little bit more seamless. This step isn't necessary, I just hate how uneven these blocks can be. Apparently I didn't record it, but I painted everything white, and then I'm taking this hexagon wood piece from Dollar Tree to use as the top of the stool. I was debating leaving the stool top natural wood or painting it, but I ended up painting it white also. Next, I'm taking this mandala stencil that I have and adding it to the top using a tan paint. And that's it for this one. I think it is just so adorable. I want to make more, but I can't find any more of these hexagon wood pieces in my stores. Someday I will find them again.
So I have this foam core board that I'm cutting down to be 17 inches long by 4 inches wide. And this is just a scrap piece of foam core board that I've used over and over again. As you can see, other things have been cut out of it. But once I have this piece cut down, we're going to be making a little hanging shelf, like an industrial type looking shelf. I did just paint this board with my mineral color chalk paint because I didn't want it to be white, just in case you could see through the blocks a little bit, but that part may not be necessary. Next, I'm just taking all of my blocks and we're just going to start gluing them right down in a row in a straight line all the way across the top of the foam core board. Once I get to the second row, I'm going to place my block, as you can see here, in the middle of the block is going to be where two of the previous blocks meet on the row above it so that it has a little bit of a staggered look. And I'm going to repeat this process all the way across this foam core board, alternating the rows and where they are placed. Next, I want to cut off those pieces that are hanging off of the edge. So I'm just using my miter box here with my saw and just cutting those down so that it is a nice straight line. I was going to leave the shelf just like this, but I thought it could use a little bit more of a finished look. So I grabbed more of my Jenga blocks and I'm gonna start gluing them all the way around the border, but this time they're gonna be up and down. So you can see the ones we glued down to the foam core board were laying down flat, and these ones are gonna be up on their side. And I just glued them all the way around the edge. I did end up having to cut two of the pieces down because they would not fit whole. Next, I'm taking these plant hangers that you can find at the Dollar Tree. I did grab 2 packs of them because I need 4 and only 3 of these chain link parts come in one package. So you can see what I'm doing here. I just attached 2 of them together so that I would have a longer strand. And then I am going to attach it to itself. Not quite at the top. I did leave about 3 links loose, and then I connected the bottom of the chain to 3 links down from the top. And that was it for this one. So easy, and I just love the modern industrial look of this one. Let me know what you guys think. For any of these projects that I am doing today, you could certainly paint the blocks, stain the blocks, whatever your preference would be. I am really into the natural wood look right now, so I decided to leave them exactly how they come.
I saw this little ceramic basket on the Pottery Barn site. I immediately thought I could make that with Jenga blocks. It took me a little while to figure it out, but eventually I had the idea. I laid out my blocks in this formation to create a circle. The challenging part was that only the very corner of the horizontally placed blocks were touching the vertical blocks. But I figured I could hot glue them like this and then fill in the gaps. So I went around the circle, hot gluing all of the corners together. Then I need to start adding on the next layer. It looks like as the basket went up on the Pottery Barn version, it tapered in. So again, I added the vertical Jenga blocks on at an angle. Next, I added another row of the blocks horizontally in between the straight up and down sections. At this point, the full block still fits perfectly in the middle, and again, I only glued the corners at an angle. I decided to only make mine 3 rows high, but I didn't need to add another block to make it taller. I just need to add a block across to finish off that top. However, since the block is tapered in now, the full Jenga block doesn't fit in between. So I got out my miter box to cut a small bit of the block off until it fits. I think it looks pretty good just like this. If you're not a perfectionist like I am, you can paint it up and throw some flowers in it to be done, but as usual, I'm going to take it a step further and fill in all of those gaps. I chose this joint compound to fill in the gaps, but I think wood filler might have been a better choice. Anyways, I filled in all of the gaps, and I had to do this a few times because the joint compound shrinks a little bit as it dries. I also wish I would have filled in the gaps a little bit more with the hot glue to make the gaps sturdier before adding in the joint compound. But once all of the gaps were filled in, I took a 220 grit sandpaper and smoothed it out. I didn't worry about getting all the joint compound sanded off because I'm going to be painting this piece and the paint will even it out. Next, I painted the whole thing white with Fluff by Dixie Belle. You can use any color or brand of paint for this, but I only gave it one thick coat. Now, to get that high gloss finish, I ended up picking up some gloss spray sealer and covered the vase with this. I didn't want to see brush strokes from painting on the gloss Mod Podge like I did with the pillar candle holders, but other than the size of this little vase, I think it looks pretty darn close to the Pottery Barn version. Project is not an original idea. I saw this on Pinterest and I'm sure it's been done plenty of times. And I won't bore you with watching me glue countless sets of blocks together, so here's what you will need to get started. 2 9-block sets, 4 4-block sets, and 16 2-block sets. Next, we're going to create 2 X's. You want to take one of the 9-block pieces and glue 2 of the 4-block pieces going straight out on either side from the center of the 9-block piece. And you want to do that 2 times. Then add one of the X's on top of the other and make sure all arms of the snowflake are evenly spaced. Now we need these little cube wood pieces from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to glue 2 of the 2-block pieces to each cube. So you end up with a V shape, and you're going to need 8 of these pieces. Now add the V's onto the snowflake. You want to start on the bottom part of the snowflake. Since we glued one X on top of the other, there's a part that's lower touching the table and a part that is higher. You want to start adding the V's onto the lower part, and I hope that makes sense. Then when I added the V's on the top section, I put a Jenga block under the snowflake arm so that when I push down on the cube, it doesn't break the snowflake and has some support. Next, we need to make a smaller V. So this time glue 1 block length onto a cube piece, and you need 8 of these pieces. Then I glued these on the same way, starting with the arms that were resting on the table and then adding a Jenga block under the other arms to add them on. Then I added a cube right in the center of the snowflake. Now, the rest of this project is really customizable depending on your style and what you like in your home. I spray painted the entire snowflake white. And once the paint dried, I wanted to add a little bit of tan around the edges, but I got carried away and didn't like how it was starting to look, so I scrapped that and re-spray painted it. I just left it solid white, but you could distress it or paint the snowflake a color, add a white wax. That would actually be really beautiful, but the possibilities are endless here. You guys, look at how big these blocks are compared to the Dollar Tree ones. Like, the Dollar Tree ones just look so teeny tiny. There is the size of one block compared to a Dollar Tree Jenga block. Like, how crazy. Each box is $12, certainly more than the Dollar Tree ones, but you can make some really nice size projects. My 11-year-old picked out this first project and really wanted me to make a mini plant ladder. I was going to make it out of scrap wood, but thought it would be perfect using these blocks. I started out gluing 4 blocks end to end using regular wood glue. This is going to be the smaller top shelf. Now, I wanted my shelves to have a staggered look with the blocks, which required me to cut several blocks in half, but you could certainly make straight stacked rows if you don't have a saw to cut the blocks. And this shelf is 4 blocks wide by 4 blocks long, and the second shelf is 4 blocks wide by 4.5 blocks long. Next, I made 4 5-block pieces. I figured you don't want to keep watching me glue blocks together, so here's where we are so far. Now I need to attach 2 of the 5-block pieces to make an open bottom triangle. I don't know what you would call that shape, but this part almost caused me to give up on this project. I had to figure out most of it off camera because I was getting so frustrated. I cut the angle way too long and deep, so the side wasn't as wide as I wanted it to be. So I cut that top block off, glued a new one on, and cut a smaller angle. And that worked great for the first side. But when I tried to replicate it for the second side, I couldn't get the pieces to line up. There was a large gap between the 2 pieces where I couldn't get glue on enough of the surface, so I had to add a shim to the second side. Once the glue was dried, I cut the tips flat, that way the top of the ladder can sit on it. Okay guys, I have all of my pieces ready to go to build this plant ladder. So we have our little like triangular pieces. These are going to be the sides, and then we're going to put our shelves in between here. And then this is the top of our plant ladder. So this is a 2x4 block. I changed this to be staggered like the shelves and only 3 blocks wide, but 2.5 long. And then we have our 2 shelves. So one is slightly longer than the other. And then we have our rungs for the shelves to sit on. So I have 4 of these 2 block pieces, 1x2. I guess we'll call them. All right, now we can put everything together and build this piece. I next needed to figure out where the shelves are going to go on the ladder. I don't want to attach the sides directly to the shelves, so that's why I have the rungs. But they're a little too tall, so I cut them down to the height that I wanted, and then drilled a pilot hole through the side and down into the rung so the screw doesn't split the wood and attach them together. Getting the second side on was a little bit tricky. My craft table is not level, and I always forget that when building projects like this. So the shelf ended up being level lengthwise, but has a slight decline from the front to the back. Then I did the same thing for the top shelf.
I'm not sure why I didn't show it. I must have forgot to hit record, but I just used wood glue and attached the top piece. And last, I stained it up with special walnut, and that's it for this one. I love how you can make some larger scale projects with these blocks. I ended up using 61 blocks, just under the 63 that came in a box. Project is nothing new, but something I still wanted to create. So I'm making a tissue box cover for my bathroom, and this one's going to require a few packs of Jenga blocks. I'm gluing 6 rows of 5 blocks together. However, I want the rows to be staggered. So I glue 1 row of 5 full blocks, and then the next row had 4 full blocks and 1 block cut in half with 1/2 on either end. And then I glued the rows together. For the short sides, I used 3 blocks and again staggered them. You can see the rows are not all the same length because, as we all know, Dollar Tree products are not all created equal, so to fix that, I used my miter box again and cleaned up the edges. Before adding the top of the box, I glued the sides together, that way I could make sure it was big enough to fit around my tissue boxes and easily slide off and on. For the top, I glued 16 blocks in a row, long sides together, and I made 2 pieces like this. For the opening, I added 3 blocks to the ends, going the opposite direction. You could leave the box just like this and be done. I wanted to add some more detail, so I painted the box with watered down burlap color paint by Dixie Belle. I wanted to still see the wood grain through the paint. I wanted to give the box a little bit more depth as well, so I added my DIY dark wax. Just the tiniest bit was all it needed, and I used a baby wipe to apply it. That way it wouldn't get too dark or streaky. For one last detail, I'm taking this IOD Rub-On Transfer Painterly Florals. This transfer is so beautiful. I used the lavender pieces along the front and partially around the sides. But I wanted to make the transfers look like part of the box, so I took my X-Acto knife over each line of the blocks, and now the tissue box is complete. I'm taking this rectangular shaped MDF board that I had in my garage. You can find signs at the Dollar Tree that are shaped just like this, but I already had this on hand, and I'm gonna paint it with my Waverly Crimson chalk paint. No, I'm not gonna make you watch me paint the entire board. I had this inspiration from this Milk for Santa little milk jar that I got from Walmart. It was $2, and I wanted to create a tray to go along with it that says Cookies for Santa. And you can tell here I realized halfway through putting on my border pieces that I forgot to add in my words. So I kind of stopped and did things a little out of order, but that's okay, it turns out fine. This is the first projects that I am using my Cricut machine for. I got this for my birthday from my mom, and I am in love with it. It was the best decision I ever made to ask for a Cricut for my birthday. I just love putting this thing to use. I got the Cricut Explore Air too. I'm also using the Target brand clear contact paper to add my words on. I didn't like how the Cricut transfer tape is so sticky. It was ripping my paint off of all of my projects, and I was getting really frustrated. So I went out and got the Target brand one, which is a lot less sticky and didn't rip my paint off. I tried to find words or a font in the Cricut Design Studio that kind of matched what was already on that little milk jar. This doesn't look exactly the same, but I think it's close enough and looks really cute. Then we can finish up the border piece, and I just took those Jenga tumbling tower blocks from the Dollar Tree and painted those white, and I'm just gluing those down all the way around the edge. I took the corner pieces and I did those last. I just held one in there as like a guide for where I needed to put the rest of them, but I wanted to just cut them all down at once and glue them down together instead of having to keep stopping and figuring out where I needed to make a cut at. Last, I'm taking these drawer pull handles that I got from Amazon. I had these left over from a furniture flip that I did on my dressers a while back, and I thought these would be the perfect little handles for this tray. And I just hot glued these on. This is purely going to be a decorative piece, and no one was going to be actually lifting it up from those handles, so I think it's turned out fine. And how cute is this? I cannot wait to put out some cookies for Santa on Christmas Eve. My son is going to love decorating this.
Alright, this one is Pinterest inspired, and I came across this image and then saw the price and knew I could definitely make it with Jenga blocks. I just had to figure out how to make it look rounded, so that's where dowel rods come in. I glued a dowel to the edge of one block and then to the edge of a second, but leaned the blocks in towards each other to start forming a rounded shape. And I repeated this with 5 blocks and 4 dowels. I let that set up and dry for a few minutes and then added one more block just in a row, this time to both ends, and created a second arch set to glue both sides together. Then I glued a few more block sets together and added them to the oval. I needed a bottom for the oval, so I cut out a piece of foam core board and glued that on. This would also be really cute as a bird feeder. I also made a second oval piece for the top, and here's how it's looking so far. Last I added a jute hanger, and that's it for this one. It was really easy to make. I filled the bottom in with some rocks and then added my air plant. This version cost less than $1, which is much better than the sale price of $115. I'm starting out using my wood glue again, and we are just going to glue 3 blocks together to form a row. Next, I needed to cut down one of these blocks, and in my last Dollar Tree Jenga block video, I had a bunch of subscribers tell me to use the miter shears. So since I have those, I thought that was a great idea. I thought that would work out perfectly, but I don't have the best hand strength. I'm pretty weak, so you can see I'm struggling a bit here to use these, but I also do think that my miter shears are pretty dull, and I probably just need to get a new pair. At least that's what I'm gonna tell myself. But once I finally got that cut down, I only needed to cut down 2, so it wasn't that bad. And then I just glued 2 additional blocks to it to form another row of 3. And these are going to form a little handle for our basket. So next I'm going to start angling my blocks to form a little arch. And I know what you're thinking, didn't I just do this and it didn't really work out for me? Well, we're doing it a little different here. And this was supposed to be a Pinterest inspired piece, but you know, things never really turn out the way I want them to around here lately, so it totally doesn't look anything like what I was going for. But anyways, I started out laying down my first row, and then the next row I am putting directly on top, and you can see that they're kind of staggered. So I have one block that's overlapping
2 of the blocks below it, and then I'm adding my wood glue to the flat side of the block and then gluing it to the block underneath of it. So that's what's going to help hold everything together here. Each row that I go up, I'm eliminating 1 block, and we're just making it a little bit shorter until I am left with 4 blocks on the last row. So once that first section was done, I let that dry, and then we're going to flip it over and repeat that same process on the back side so that the handle is in the middle and it's kind of going to be a basket look in the end. Not exactly what I was going for. I'll pop a picture of what I had intended to make up on the screen here. It was supposed to be like a geometric looking planter, but you know, it ended up looking more like a basket. So next time, I think I know how to get it to look the way I wanted. We'll see. Once I had everything added, all of my blocks glued down and dried, I did just take it out to my garage and spray painted it with Rust-Oleum slate spray paint. And now I'm taking some Dollar Tree rub-on transfers. I thought I had gold ones that were this little like foliage looking, but apparently I don't. I only had the black, so I thought that would be okay. It would be a little more of a subtle look than the gold ones would be. Just added on some of these rub-on transfers throughout the sides of the basket. And last, I don't know what happened to the lighting here, but I just added a bow. I tied it on with some jute string just so that I can change it out if I ever wanted to or take it off entirely. And that was it for this one. I have it staged to be a little fall right now since we are starting to head into that season.
This is not a new idea, but I've always wanted to make a wishing well using Jenga blocks, and I love that this one is much larger and would look so cute on the porch or in a garden. For the base of the well, I'm making a hexagon, and don't try to tell me in the comments this is an octagon. An octagon has 8 sides, and this one has 6. But anyways, as I move up the sides, I staggered the blocks so it could create a more circular shape. Then I used my wood glue to attach the blocks together and went 5 rows high. For the posts of the well that hold up the roof, I glued 3 blocks end to end. I only showed 2 at first, but I went back later on and added the 3rd block. Next, for the roof, I first cut a 45-degree angle at the top of 14 blocks. You could use a miter box to do this, but the blocks are pretty thick, so I quickly gave up on that idea and used my chop saw. I am a mess, you guys. My mic wasn't on, so I'll just voice over this part. I cut the blocks to make the roof peak, and I'm holding onto the little triangle pieces to use in another project. I glued the angled pieces together to have 7 sets and then glued those 7 sets together. Just like the Dollar Tree blocks though, the 5 below blocks are not all created equal and some are longer or wider than others. And this was not long enough to make the roof, so I added 7 more blocks on each side. Now we can assemble the pieces. You can see there are still 2 blocks on the posts here. I didn't add that 3rd one yet. Then to help the roof sit on the posts, I glued one of those cut triangle pieces onto each post. And you guys, I glued one of them on facing the wrong direction and could not for the life of me figure out why they wouldn't line up the same way. I thought they were different sizes and tried to find another one that was smaller. Oh my gosh, I was so oblivious. And then the roof wouldn't sit right on top. It still took me a few minutes to figure out what was wrong here. You can see here when I added the roof, there isn't much space between the base and the roof. So off camera, that's when I added on another block to the post to raise it up a bit more. Now to decorate the well, I loved the idea of adding moss to the roof and in between the blocks. Well, I was so excited to start adding the moss, I completely forgot I wanted to paint the well first. So it ends up being just natural wood instead.
I had these moss sheets from Dollar Tree and I thought they were perfect for this. And then to make it look a little bit more realistic, I added some loose moss around the edges and in between the blocks on the base. I used 64 blocks for the well, 1 block more than a box, but to stick with 1 box, you could leave the posts only 2 blocks high. Project, I'm starting out gluing 6 blocks together end to end, and I'm making 6 sets like this. Next, I'm taking these 2 wood circles from my stash. The larger one I know is from Dollar Tree, and I'm not sure where I got the smaller one from. So I'm making a plant stand, and I really wasn't sure how this was going to work out. I'm using the smaller circle for the bottom and needed the Jenga block sticks to go out at an angle. Hot glue was my best option here to attach them, so I could fill in that space where the block doesn't sit on the circle. I just realized I'm wearing my grumpy shirt. So a little backstory, my son Mason tells me that I'm always grumpy. Like several times a day he tells me this, even when I'm not. So when we were in Disney over spring break, I had to get a grumpy shirt. We couldn't find one in Disney, so this one's actually from Amazon, but I thought it was pretty funny because we used to call my dad grumpy when I was a kid, so I guess it's my turn now. Anyways, back to the project, I drew a line through the center of the circle so I knew where to place the first 2 pieces. Then I measured the distance between the 2 so I could space out the rest of the blocks evenly. Then I added the rest of the blocks to the smaller circle first, and then flipped it over and glued them down on the top circle. When I did the big circle, I glued down 1 piece, then did the opposite side. That way it was staying stable and level, and I wasn't pulling the circle more to one side. Once all the sticks were glued on, I added some more hot glue to fill in any gaps and make sure they were all supported. Next, I wanted to add some more Jenga blocks around the top as the sides. But one thing to note here, I was making sure the whole block was glued onto the circle, which left a little bit of the circle sticking out. I wish I would have pulled the blocks out just a little bit so you didn't see any of that circle on top. I think it would have looked a little bit cleaner that way, but not a big deal. When I got to the end of the circle, I did have to cut down one of the blocks to fit, and this time I used my miter box. I added 2 more rows so that it was 3 blocks high, and I staggered them. So this next block is going across 2 underneath of it. I also added 1 row to the bottom circle as well. Next, I stained the whole thing in English chestnut, and that's it for this little guy. I love it. I haven't seen anything like this before, but I do wonder how strong it will be and how long it will hold up. I don't think it's super sturdy. Just throwing that out there in case you decide to give this one a try. Power block shelf together in my last Jenga block video and wanted to repurpose it. I will link that video above and in my description box below if you haven't seen it yet, but I thought this was the perfect size and shape to make a fall scarecrow with. I started out taking 4 of the Jenga blocks and laid them out where the rim of his hat was going to go. That way I knew where I wanted to draw the face. And I took a pencil and started drawing on his face, and it's okay if you mess up. You see me, I keep erasing here. You just keep working at it until you are happy with the way the face turns out. Next, I took a Sharpie paint marker and started outlining the face that I had drawn on for my scarecrow. for his nose, I took my Waverly chalk paint in the color pumpkin and colored in my triangle. While I let that paint dry, I took my 4 tower blocks for the rim of his hat and I started gluing those together. Then I took my antique Waverly wax on a wet baby wipe and I started applying that to the rim of his hat, and then I drew a pencil where his hat was going to go so I knew where to put that antique wax on the top of the scarecrow. Next, I took some white puff paint and just added this in to give that little white lifelike look to his eyes. And then I realized I also have black puff paint, so I decided to outline just parts of this, mostly his eyes and then his mouth with the puff paint. I did leave the center of his eyes and then the orange nose in just that flat look, but I wanted it to have a little bit more of a 3D element, and this puff paint was perfect for that. Next, I wanted to give him a little shirt, and I have this fabric yard that is pre-packaged, ready to go, that I bought from Walmart, and I thought it was the perfect print to give this guy a plaid flannel shirt. I did cut out 2 rectangles of the fabric and then glued them together so that whenever I was folding over his collar, you wouldn't see that white and you would see the fabric instead. So I'm rolling down his collar here and I'm going to just glue that down in place. Next, I'm just going to fit it onto him, and I did roll that collar top part down 2 times, and then I want to kind of make those triangles like it's the collar of his shirt folded down. So I just hot glued down the sides of the fabric to the sides of the wood blocks, and then I also glued down the top section of the fabric as well. To glue his collar down, I just folded it over and added a tiny little dot of hot glue just to tack it down so that it wasn't too flat against his shirt. And for a last little detail, I added on some buttons to finish off his shirt, and this guy is so cute.
Oh, Daddy just got home, huh? Yes, I know.
Of course, Sarge had to get in the way of my filming today, but you know, that's just life. What do you guys think of this adorable little scarecrow for fall? I am just in love with him. He is so stinking cute. All right, we are gonna start out making the tiered tray, and I had every intention of making this with all Dollar Tree products, but you can see here that some of that like paper and glue from the mat was just stuck on there, and me being too forceful and trying to get every last little bit of that off, I ended up breaking the glass. Of course, I am not surprised because I'm way too rough with things like this, and the Dollar Tree product is just not the quality to stand up to me. But anyways, it ended up being a happy mistake, or a happy accident. I really love the way it ended up turning out. I just grabbed some scrap wood from my living room transformation in my garage, cut it down to the exact same sizes that the frames were. You can see that up in the corner there, and then I'm just going to paint these black. I was going to paint the picture frames themselves, or the glass part of the picture frames black and the frames, but this ended up working out just fine. So next I'm going to take some tumbling tower blocks and I'm going to glue these together to form the like edge of our tray, if that makes sense. You'll see what I mean here in a second, but I'm not going to tell you how many I glued together because it's just going to depend on the size of your tray base. So I ended up having to cut a few of them down with my handsaw to make sure it would fit perfectly across all 4 corners. See, so you can see here that they didn't all fit with full blocks, so I did just have to mark them, and like I said, I took these out in my garage, just used my handsaw and cut them down to the length I needed. Next, I just took some lightweight spackling and filled in all the holes. Some of these I glued with hot glue, some of them I glued with wood glue because I wanted to see what the difference was. I wanted this to look like one full piece of wood, but it really didn't matter because both ways I did it, you could still tell that these were blocks glued together. So it's probably easier to just use the hot glue. But then I filled in any little cracks with the spackling, and once that dried, I just took a damp cloth and I was able to just wipe off any excess. I didn't need to sand it at all. That part was great. And the next thing I'm gonna do is take my antique Waverly antique wax, and I'm just going to paint all of my block pieces, front, back, and all of their sides. Then I'm going to take my hot glue and just glue all 4 sides around the base part of my tray. And I love that you could still see the wood grain through this black paint. I think this looks so gorgeous. It's just plywood. Once I had those together, I wanted to add some little feet to the bottom part of the tray. So I got these from, I believe they're from Walmart. They might be Hobby Lobby, but I'm pretty sure they're Walmart. But they came with 2 different sizes, and I used the smaller size, used the Waverly wax again on these, and then just hot glued them in all 4 corners of my tray. So then I'm taking a Dollar Tree vase, and I'm not gonna paint it or do anything. I'm gonna leave it clear like this. This is going to be our pillar in between the 2 tiers. And then I'm going to take some boxwood that I got. I think this is from Hobby Lobby. I just cut a piece off of the pick, and I'm gonna put that down in the center, and that's going to be the center of our tray. I really love the way this looks. I don't think I've seen many trays like this, so I really think it's different. Then I'm just taking my E6000 and hot glue. You don't want to mix the 2. If you're going to do this for the long-term, short-term hold, you want to make sure you leave gaps in that E6000 and only put your hot glue where those gaps are, or you're going to break down the bonding properties of the E6000. So then I'm just going to glue my vase on to the top tray where it needs to go. I let that set overnight. Well, no, I did glue it onto the bottom, but for some reason I don't think I filmed that. I don't know why, or I lost it. Something happened, who knows? That happens in all my videos. But anyways, I wanted to take these stamps that I got and add my initials. This is something my husband does. He does woodworking and makes wood flags. So he always brands the bottom or the back of his flags with his initials. I mean, he does it with iron and literally burns it into the wood. I'm not gonna do that with these little projects, but I thought it would be cool to just add my initials onto the bottom of my projects here. And here's how the tray turned out. I absolutely love the way this looks. I think it is so different, and I haven't really seen ones created in this way. So let me know in the comments, what do you think of this small tiered tray?
For this project, I'm taking 2 blocks and gluing them end to end and creating 8 sets like this. You'll see here there are 3 blocks, but I ended up changing that, and I also made 4 sets of 6 blocks glued end to end. So I'm making a lantern here and realized I made assembling it harder than it needed to be. I thought it would be easiest to put the 4 sides together first, so I took 2 of the 3 block pieces, I didn't cut the 3rd block off just yet, and glued 1 to each end of the 6 block piece. When I went to put the sides together, I realized the 3 blocks was just too long, so that's when I got out my miter box and cut 1 block off of each end. This looks much better, and I can now glue the pieces together. There's going to be a square in the center, and the sections are not going to line up evenly. I glued 1 section to kind of the middle of the blocks for the section next to it. I hope that makes sense, but you'll see how it starts to come together. And I only glued the top together first, let that dry, and then glued the bottom. So I made this same lantern, but with the giant Jenga blocks from Five Below, and this time I glued the bottom together first, then added the sides and flipped it over to add the top. And I think this way was a little easier to assemble in case you want to recreate this project. Back to the regular size blocks, I'm using one of these wood circles from Dollar Tree for the base of the lantern and filled in the hole with spackle, and then glued it down to the bottom of the lantern. At first I only used wood glue, but the blocks are not even, so I added a dab of hot glue as well. Then I stained the lantern with that same Valspar antiquing glaze, but I didn't love how that looked, so I ended up painting the blocks black and left the circle with the stain. And that's it for this one. I think it's such a cute lantern, and you can make this as small or as large as you want.
For this project, I am taking 5 of these tumbling tower blocks or Jenga blocks, and we are gluing them down together in a row. I started out using my wood glue, but pretty quickly ended up switching over to my hot glue just because I wanted to keep moving along with the project and didn't want to wait for that glue to dry. But for a longer term hold, I would certainly stick with the wood glue. And we're gonna make 4 sets of these 5 blocks. Once you have your 4 sets of 5 blocks, then we are going to create 10 sets of 2 blocks, again just gluing them in a row just like you see me doing here. Once all of the glue dries, we're going to start assembling. So I'm taking one of these 2 block sets and then one of the 5 block sets, and we're going to create like a little L here. You can see I started adding in my hot glue and mixing it with my, not mixing it, but putting 2 lines, and that didn't really work. The wood glue kind of canceled out my hot glue, and I had to reattach this whole part. But we're going to be making a little rectangle and then adding the top right here with the second set of 5 blocks. And we're going to create 2 of those rectangles. Now I'm going to add my sides, and I started out adding 1 block at a time. I would recommend that you create the 10 sets of 2 blocks at the beginning. That way when you put the top on, everything lines up together. I ended up having to play around with the side posts a little bit because they were not perfectly straight the way that I had glued them. Next, we're going to take the second rectangle that we made in the beginning, and we're going to add it to the top of our little post that we just added, creating this like rectangular box. And what we are making is actually an open terrarium. So next I'm going to have to add on the roof, and I wasn't really sure how I was going to do this at first to get that slanted triangular roof. So I took this multi-pack or variety pack of dowels that I have from Walmart, and I just took the smallest size dowel in that pack, and I'm going to use that on the edge on both sides of my roof, and that way I can then slant my blocks so that they can create that roof peak. And I'm just going to cut my dowel down to size here and then hot glue it down right at the very edge of my blocks on both sides. Now we're going to take those remaining 2 block sets, and here I'm going to start adding in my hot glue, and you want to make sure you hold this in place at an angle until that glue dries. That way it doesn't start to fall over on you, and it's going to hold that position, which you can kind of see here. I know it's a little bit out of frame, but then I'm going to add that second one on, and I do this 4 more times, adding all 6 of my 2 block sets on top of my roof. Then I did fill in any gaps between that dowel and the block with my hot glue just to make sure the structure was going to be nice and sturdy. Next, I'm taking one of the larger, I think this is the largest size dowel in that variety pack. I'm going to cut this down to size as well. I ended up using my miter box for this one because my miter shears are pretty dull and I really need to get a new blade for those things.
Once I had that cut down, I'm gonna use this to just kind of cover up where these blocks sit together, and I did glue them together at the top first just so they wouldn't move around on me while I was trying to add that dowel in place, and then we're going to attach the dowel to the top. Next, I just gave it a really good coat of the Mineral Waverly chalk paint. Now, you could do so many different things with this project. I wanted to keep it minimal, but you could add on rub-on transfers, do decoupage with some napkins, make it colorful, whatever fits your vibe. But that's it for this one, and I absolutely love the way it turned out. But what do you guys think? I'm making a modern snowman. You're going to take 8 blocks and glue them long sides together and make 2 rows like this. I use Dollar Tree wood glue super glue for my Jenga block projects to get a cleaner look. You can definitely use hot glue, but it does leave a small gap between the blocks, which I don't like, but that's just personal preference. Once you have both rows put together, glue one on top of the other, and this is the snowman's face. Next, I'm going to build his hat. I decided to make 2 rows of 4 blocks for the brim of his hat. This time you want to glue them end to end. Now for the top of his hat, I wanted it to be a little bit narrower than the face to differentiate it, so I used 7 blocks and centered them over the face. That's it for the building portion. Now we need to paint our little friend. Nothing groundbreaking here. I painted the hat black and his face white. So shocking for a snowman, I know. Once the paint dried, it's time to decorate him. Like I said in the beginning, this is a modern snowman, so I'm not giving him a face. You absolutely could if you wanted to, but I've made quite a few snowmen this year in 2022 that I wanted to do something different. I have this metal ribbon from Dollar Tree and cut a piece to fit across the brim of his hat. Now, silver's not a color that I gravitate towards, so I grabbed my brushed gold acrylic paint and dabbed it on top of the metal. Already, I love this color so much better, but to take it a step further, I added a dark wax on top. I used my Star Bond super glue with the accelerator to attach the metal. Super glue is the best option for metal. Then I realized some of the black hat was sticking out a little bit under that metal ribbon, so I touched that up with a detail brush in my white paint, and it looks so much better. Next, I added a few pine pieces and a pine cone to the corner of his hat, and that's it for this little guy. Let me know, do you like the modern snowman with no face, or do you think he should have had a face? Making a hexagon little frame shelf, and I'm starting out by gluing 7 of these blocks in a row
And we're going to create 6 sets for all the sides of our hexagon. For this one, I did use the Starbond glue and it seemed to work out. It didn't absorb into the wood as much as the first time I had tried it. And I wonder if the sides are different from the edges when you're gluing the pieces together, because this one seemed to work out just fine. Not really sure what the difference is. But once I had all of my parts, I'm just going to start laying them out in my hexagon shape before I start gluing everything together, just to make sure it all sits right. And it did take me quite a little bit to get that shape completely figured out. There is a little bit of a gap right where all of the sides meet. So what I did was take a dowel rod, I measured it up against the height of a tumbling tower block, cut it down with my miter shears, and then I just used that to reinforce the edges where all of my hexagon sides met together, and that worked out just fine. So next I wanted to create like a little pocket. You know how you see those like wall planters right now that are really popular? You can find them, they're mostly like galvanized. So I thought it would be cool to make one that was like this hexagon little frame. So I started taking more of these Jenga blocks and I am gluing them down around the edges kind of in a staggered pattern. But once I got down to the very center, there was a small gap in between those bottom two and I didn't want to cut down another block. So what I did was created a second layer and I put that very middle piece right on top there to cover that little space. And then I started working my way out to the edges. And by the time I got to the ends, there was just a tiny little bit hanging off and you really couldn't tell. So again, I'm just staggering that second row as well. And I made it slightly lower than the first row. And I really loved the way this turned out. To create the back of our little pocket, I had this hexagon shaped foam core board that I actually cut out a while ago and haven't used it for anything. So I just drew a line across the bottom portion of it so that you wouldn't really be able to see it when this was hung up on the wall. So I just cut that down with my X-Acto knife, painted it with my fawn colored Waverly chalk paint so that it would be a light brown, and then I just hot glued this to the back of my hanging wall planter. That was it for this one. Super easy. Again, I just added in some string of pearls, greenery, and hung it up on my wall.
First up, I'm making a decorative box, and I like to use my L roller when creating Jenga block projects to make sure my rows stay nice and straight. This wood glue super glue, also from Dollar Tree, is the perfect glue for Jenga blocks. Because this is a super glue, it starts to set up in about a minute, so you can keep working, where hot glue leaves a space between your blocks, and then straight wood glue just takes way too long to dry. So if you haven't tried this glue yet, you need to pick it up. For the first section of this box, I'm gluing 12 blocks together in a row, and I did that 2 times. I wanted the sides to be a little bit taller, but didn't want to stack 2 blocks high. So instead I glued a row of 4 blocks on the top and bottom, going the opposite direction for some interest. For the short sides of the box, I glued 6 blocks together and then added 2 on the top and bottom. Now to assemble the box, I just glued the 4 sides together and placed the long sides in between the short sides. That way when looking at the front, it almost has a border around the center blocks. Then I glued 2 sets of 13 blocks together and added that as the bottom. Next, I'm gonna add some feet to the bottom. I use these decorative caps from Walmart, but you could certainly keep a Dollar Tree and use wood beads or the small wood squares. I let the box dry for a little bit, and now I want to add some detail to it. So I picked up this new IOD mold recently called Olive Crest and couldn't wait to use it. It is stunning, but I did not buy the IOD air dry clay because I have a few other packs that I need to work through first. When using a silicone mold, you want to dust the bottom with cornstarch so your clay comes out easily and clean. I put way too much clay into this first mold. Less is definitely more here. You can always add on more. Once I finally cleaned the edges up and pulled the clay out, I placed it on top of the box to dry. I did paint the mold once it dried, but I'm not going to go too much into detail there. I didn't end up keeping it, but I wanted to still share my process with you. Next, I gave the box a heavy dry brush of white chalk paint. I wanted the wood to show through, but mostly be white. Then I glued the olive branches on with E6000, but this is where I decided I didn't like the way that it was looking, so I took them off and made a new mold using this ornate label. This time I just painted it white and then added some florals into the box, and that's it for this one. I love the way this box turned out, but let me know in the comments, which mold did you prefer? This project, I'm starting with 5 blocks and gluing them long sides together. Then I cut down 2 blocks with a 45-degree angle and glued those together. I also cut 1 block in half to extend that triangle shape a bit because we're making a little house. So this is where we need those scrap triangle pieces cut from the 45-degree angle earlier. I used these pieces to fill in from the full blocks to the peak of the roof, and then glued those in place. When the glue was a little bit dry, I added the 5 block sets I started with. There's a small gap on one side of the house, but that's okay, it's gonna get filled in later. Now, I had painted the house white, and again, I forgot what my plan was. I originally wanted the first layer to be dark, so I sanded the paint down a bit and then went over it with my espresso color stain, and then let that dry overnight. Next, I'm using spackle to add texture. This will fill in that small crack and conceal all of the little triangle pieces a bit. I took a small amount on my scraper and then lightly dragged it across the surface. I don't want to fill the whole piece in, just make it sporadic. Once the spackle was dry, for the next layer, I'm adding some crackle medium. In the end, you really don't see much of the crackle, so this step probably isn't necessary, but again, I just added this in random spots. And then once that layer is dry, I'm taking Apothecary by DIY Paint. You can use any pop color you choose and applying this randomly as well, but making sure to cover where I applied that crackle medium. I also dragged the brush across the house when there was hardly any paint left on it to continue adding that worn look. Once it dried, you can see here the crackle didn't do much. There were slight little cracks, but it may have been because I put it on top of spackle and not paint. Next, I'm taking this little wheatgrass bundle and wrapping some raffia around it. I put the raffia too low at first and went back later and moved it up a little bit higher, but that's it for this one. I love how it turned out with all the layers of paint. I think it is so cute. This is another super easy project. I'm taking a bunch of Jenga blocks and putting sets of 2, 3, and 4 blocks together to create a staggered look. Once I had my pattern figured out, I glued everything together and stained it with the antiquing glaze. Next, I grabbed 3 C-hooks and laid them out where I wanted them to go and drilled a pilot hole so the blocks don't split. The hooks did go through the back, so I put a dollop of hot glue over the point so it doesn't scratch my walls. You could embellish this so many different ways, either with rub-on transfers, decoupage, clay mold pieces, or even just leave it plain. I wasn't thinking and tried to put a dark rub-on transfer onto this dark stain, and it obviously didn't show up. So I just gave the whole thing a heavy dry brush of white paint and put on a new transfer.
Next project was a struggle to put together, but we'll get into that. I'm gonna start out making 4 sets of the 5 blocks in a row, just like I did in the first project, and then I'm also going to add 1 block in between to create a rectangle. Next, I'm going to create 4 sets of the 3 blocks in a row, just like we did the others, and then I'm going to start painting everything with my black chalk paint. Normally, I like to glue everything together before painting or staining. This time, because of the way I wanted to put it together, I thought it would be easier to paint before finishing the build. Next, I'm taking these galvanized signs from the Dollar Tree. I'm going to remove the star. They are just screwed on there, so I unscrewed that. It leaves a hole, but we don't need to worry about that here. You're not going to see that part. Next, I'm going to take one of my rectangles and line it up to see where I need to cut this down. So the metal is going to be like a liner to this box that we are creating. So I placed a little line where I needed to cut it down, and then using some tin snips, I started cutting this, and this is where I first started struggling with this project. My tin snips were just bending the metal. They were not cutting it. Apparently, my husband told me that I was just holding it at the wrong angle. I only had an issue with this very first one that I cut down. The rest of them cut down perfectly fine, but I had to keep bending this piece back and forth and then cutting it, and then finally, eventually, I got it to work. I ended up using 3 of these signs, one full one for each rectangle side, and then another one for the sides of my box, which you'll see. And I know that these overlap a little bit, so I'm going to take my Star Bond super glue and just glue down the 2 metal pieces so that it creates a longer piece to fit inside of that rectangle. I didn't love the shininess of that galvanized metal, so I ended up taking my dark gray elephant color chalk paint and toning down that shininess a little bit. And then I also went in with my antique Waverly wax. I did dry it with my heat gun in between, and then went in with my antique Waverly wax to stress it up a little bit to add some rusted looking elements to the metal. Because of the way this metal was corrugated, it wasn't going to fully touch the wood blocks, so I only added my super glue to attach the metal where that was going to actually touch the blocks. And then taking my spray accelerator, I sprayed it on to quickly dry the glue. As soon as I glued the first piece of metal down, I realized I had not cut them down short enough so the sides of my box would fit together. I pried up the metal and then measured with the blocks where I needed to cut them down. Then when I added the side blocks on, I realized I still didn't cut the metal down short enough. I should have cut it down entirely and not just where the blocks needed to sit, because the 2 edges of the metal were not sitting together right. So once again, I lifted up the metal, cut a sliver off, then glued it back down. And finally, I figured that part out and added the rest of my metal pieces in sides of the box. Next, I painted the inside part of the metal with my black chalk paint just to conceal it a little bit, and then added on a bottom just using a Dollar Tree sign that I had painted black, and that was it for this piece. So it absolutely was a struggle to put together. I wanted to add on some cute little handles on top. I didn't end up doing that because I was so frustrated by the end of this. I just wanted to be done with it. But let me know, what do you guys think? This is definitely more of an industrial look, but could certainly go modern farmhouse as well. This next project is going to use a lot of Jenga blocks. I am warning you of that now. I used 4 boxes to make a reindeer and he is so adorable. I'm gonna spare you some of the gluing as it gets really repetitive, but I will show you what each piece looks like and pop the numbers up on the screen. So I started out gluing 6 blocks end to end and made 5 sets just like this. I do change this later on, so if you're following along, do as I say, not as I do, make it easier on yourself, and only glue 4 blocks end to end. Next, I glued the sets together to make a rectangle, and you're going to need 4 rectangle pieces. Then we're going to glue the rectangles together to create a box. I glued 3 sides and then let that sit for about 15 minutes or so, then I glued that last side on. Next, I'm making the legs for the reindeer. I wanted them to look square, so I glued them together where each block was on the inside of the block previously. I hope that makes sense. I don't know how else to explain it, but you can see what I'm doing. For each leg, I made 3 of these square sets and I glued them on top of each other, so each leg has 12 blocks. Then I glued the legs onto the bottom 4 corners of the rectangle body. Now I need to build the neck and head. So starting with the neck, I made 6 sets of 3 blocks and glued those together. And then took 6 more sets of 3 blocks and glued those directly on top of that first set. Then I took a set of 4 blocks and glued those horizontally across the edge of the set that we just made. Next, I'm taking a set of 6 individual blocks and gluing that on top of that 4-piece set so it's sticking straight up. And you want to make 2 of these as well. Next, I'm taking 8 more 3-block sets and gluing those in the middle. I know this is just a lot of gluing at the moment, but I promise you will start to see him come together. Now I'm adding another set of those 4 blocks to the end of the piece sticking out. So it's basically a little sandwich of horizontal and vertical blocks. This is his neck and the bottom of his jaw, so I'm going to add it onto the body of my reindeer now. And I hope you'll see the vision a little bit better. I set that aside to dry for a little bit and had to put something on top to hold the neck down because it was a little bit top heavy. Now I'm taking another 6-block set and gluing it on top. We're gonna repeat the same thing we did on the bottom of the neck, only not as tall. The top of the head will only be 2 block sets high. And at first I only did 1 block high, but I thought it needed to be a little bit taller. Before I add that last top section, I'm building out his nose. So I took 4 blocks and glued them in the middle, and then tapered it up with 3 blocks and then 2 blocks. Here's where I decided his head needed to be a little bit taller and added on 1 more row. Then to finish his nose, I glued 2 blocks horizontal and then 1 cube in the middle.
Okay, so then I was just looking at him and the proportions didn't look right to me. His body was just too long. So I got out my saw and I cut 2 blocks off of his back. And then I glued those 2 legs back on, and I think this looks so much better. Next, I wanted to paint him, and what better color to paint a deer than Fawn by Waverly. I love this color, but I wanted to see the wood grain still and watered it down as I painted. Then I painted his nose black. You could make him look like Rudolph and paint it red, but I didn't want that look. I also gave him some eyes, and if you don't have a steady hand, use a Sharpie here to draw the eyes on. Now for his antlers, I bought this pack of antler ornaments at Dollar Tree that were perfect. The only thing that drives me crazy is how they're all facing the same direction. So I had to flip one backwards, but that's fine. I drilled a little hole into the top at an angle for the antlers to fit nicely into, and then hot glued them in place. For his tail, I took a little piece of this white car towel from Dollar Tree and cut it into a triangle type shape and then glued that onto his back. I also cut down a piece of the car towel to use as a scarf so he looks nice and cozy for the winter. I wanted to add a bell to the center of the scarf but couldn't find one in my stash, so I used a snowflake instead. My camera cut off as I glued that on, but that's it for this little guy. He is just so stinking cute and so adorable. I love him. Slight change of plans here. I sent this picture to my husband and he thinks our little reindeer friend looks like a dog. And I don't disagree with him. And I think it's because of his antlers. My husband thinks it's the nose because I should have made it a red nose. I still don't want to make it a red nose. I think it's the antlers. They're really tiny, and I do have these antlers that I bought from Hobby Lobby last year in 2021. They're definitely more substantial, and I think they will definitely make him look more like a reindeer and less like a dog. They do have the same problem where they're both facing the same direction, so that's a little bit annoying. So they're gonna have to be, you know, looking a little bit off or a little bit funny, but that's okay. I'm gonna swap these out. Also, I did end up finding some, well, I went out and bought some bells because he needed some bells as well. So let me swap these little antlers out. Also, please ignore the mess behind me. I am so close to having my craft room completely finalized and updated and organized, and I'm gonna be sharing that with you guys here very soon. This next one is my favorite project from today. I've had this idea for over a year and just haven't done it yet. I got these chopping mats from the Dollar Tree and they are see-through. One side's kind of frosted looking and the other is shiny. I want to decoupage the mat and I grabbed 2 options from my stash. One's a decoupage paper and the other is a basic tissue paper that was a little bit more colorful. Both options are stunning and very spring feeling, but I thought you could see the print and pattern a little bit better on the blue florals, so I went with that one. Since the decoupage paper wasn't as tall as the chopping mat, I had to cut it down a little bit. I used my X-Acto knife to cut it down, and it was really easy to cut through. Guess that wouldn't really make it a good chopping mat though. I then cut the mat in half because I'm making a little light box or a lantern and it needs 4 sides. Next, I wiped down the surface of the mat. Since we're decoupaging the paper to the back or the shiny side, I wanted to make sure there was no fingerprints or dust that got trapped and you would see them from the other side. I'm going to use my liquid patina to glue the paper onto the mat, but I actually think Mod Podge or decoupage glue would have been a little bit better for this project specifically. Decoupage paper is pretty thick, much thicker than when you use a napkin, and the liquid patina dries quickly. I used a fan brush to apply the glue so it would get up under the paper easily and apply the glue to all of the areas. I wasn't thinking when I did this first one, I had wanted to add both mats to the paper before cutting the paper down, but I had only added the one mat at first, so I had to cut this one down, but for the second paper, I added both mats and glued them at the same time. As the glue was drying, I realized I could see some streaks under the paper. It was like the areas that had more glue turned the paper more transparent, and the thinner glue areas stayed whiter. So I went back over top of the whole thing with a layer of the patina. I sanded off all the excess paper, and here's why I would have used a thicker glue like Mod Podge. You can see the paper peeling away from all the corners. I had to add more patina to make sure it stays down. Next, we need to build the lantern structure. I was able to create a rectangle with the Jenga blocks without having to cut down any of them again. Winning! I made 4 rectangles, and then before I added the decoupage mats, I want to paint them. I wanted the lantern to have a ton of texture, so I added baking soda to my paint. And I added a lot of baking soda. The way I like to get the most texture by using this method is by painting the first coat on how you normally would paint something. And then when you add the second coat, or however many coats you want after, you stipple it on. I love this technique. It is kind of hard to tell on camera here, but I'll make sure to get a close-up in the reveal. Once the paint was all dry, I'm adding decoupage mats onto the blocks with hot glue. The one thing you want to be cognizant of here is that you are gluing the frosted side down, so that's what you see on the outside of the lantern. That way you don't have the paper texture facing out. Next, I assembled the lantern and glued all 4 sides together. I realized after I put everything together, I needed a base for inside of the lantern, because I'm going to add some feet and I need something to put the light on. So I glued some blocks together. They don't fit perfectly on the bottom, but that's okay. You're not going to see this part. I just painted them white as well, but not with the texture paint. It was a little difficult to get the blocks glued in. I had dry fitted it and it was pretty snug, so of course when I went to actually glue it in, one side didn't want to cooperate. But I left it as is. Like I said, you aren't going to see this part. And last, I grabbed these little feet that I have. I think these are from Hobby Lobby, and I glued them onto the base. I like how they looked being in a little bit from the edge. I just love how this project turned out. I think it is so stunning, and even more so than I had envisioned. I'm taking this frame that I found at the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to remove the back and then also remove those little clips that hold the back down in place. Once I do that, I am going to take a 220 grit sandpaper and just scuff up the edges of the frame, because this is not made out of real wood. It's actually just covered with paper. And then I'm going to paint the frame with my black chalk paint. I also do paint the back of the cardboard insert with my mineral chalk paint color, and you can see that here. Next, I'm taking my tumbling tower blocks, and this time we are going to glue them down in a chevron pattern. So I'm just going to do this all the way across my entire cardboard piece that would go inside of the frame. And you can see there are sections where I didn't glue any blocks down. I do end up cutting individual pieces and adding those in to cover the entire cardboard frame or cardboard insert. Once I had everything attached, this is where I had some trial and error. So I wanted to figure out the best and easiest way to cut off the excess blocks that were hanging off the cardboard. I thought my jigsaw would be the best way to go about this. I knew that a regular miter saw or a table saw was just going to be too powerful. Turns out the jigsaw was a little too powerful as well. It did end up, it cut some of them, and then other ones, it just ended up breaking them completely off the cardboard backing. So I did have to go back and glue those ones on. But
For this next or the second side of my cardboard piece that I needed to cut off the Jenga blocks from, I thought maybe I would use my handsaw for that since it wouldn't be so powerful like that jigsaw was. This ended up doing the same thing. It was pulling off some of the blocks. It was not going very well. So I ended up giving up on this piece pretty quick, or this method pretty quickly. And then I ended up individually cutting each one down. So I made a mark where they needed to be cut, stuck them into my vise in my garage, and then took my handsaw and cut along my mark that I made. And this was the most time consuming, but it was the best method that I could come up with for making these cuts the way I needed them to be. But after I had everything cut, I just attached them all to my cardboard board. And then I'm going to take some E6000 to attach all of the wood pieces back into the frame. And the last thing I did was just take some vinyl and cut out on my Cricut 907 because that is the house number for my address, and I wanted to stick this out on my front porch. So I'll show you a before and after. This sign is a little bit smaller than what was previously on my porch, but I really love it and it matches my home decor perfectly. Someday I will get to redo that orange stain that is on the wood paneling on my porch, but for now it's gotta stay. This project is super easy. What I'm going to do is start out taking my blocks and I'm going to glue them sideways this time instead of long ways, and I'm going to glue 2 sets of 2 blocks, 2 sets of 3 blocks, 2 sets of 4 blocks, and then 1 set of 5 blocks. And what we're going to make here is some block pumpkins. Once you have all of your block sets together, you're going to start out with the 5 block set, and we are going to glue one of the 4 block sets right on top of it, and then we're going to glue the 3 block set on top of the 4, and then the 2 on top of the 3, and then you're going to flip it over and repeat that same thing on the other side of the 5 blocks. I wanted to make one more round pumpkin and then a taller pumpkin, so I took 9 sets of the 2 blocks like we had glued them in the beginning on top of each other, and I'm going to glue 3 of those sets together and then 2 of the 2 sets together. I hope that makes sense. And then we are going to do the same thing with the wide pumpkin and just stack them on top, gluing them together. Next, I'm going to paint all of my block pumpkins with the pumpkin color chalk paint by Waverly. And I actually ended up making 3, but the third one that I made was only a really short one using 1 block. Then I'm going to take my ivory chalk paint and give a pretty heavy dry brush coat over top of all 3 of my pumpkins. Then I'm taking this DIY dark wax. I am absolutely loving this stuff. I have just started using it and it is so good to get that aged or distressed look on any of your projects. And I'm taking a baby wipe. This is actually a dried out baby wipe, and I'm just rubbing it along all of the corners of my pumpkins. I do end up going slightly over like some parts of the ivory paint as well, but mostly hitting those corners. Then I took some little branch pieces, hot glued them on top of my pumpkins, added a few little embellishments, and that was it for these ones. Super, super quick and easy, but a nice little touch for your fall display. For our last project today, I am taking sets of these Jenga blocks and I am going to put 2 together and we're going to make 25 sets like this. So you can see I'm just taking 2 of them flat sides together and gluing. Once we have all 25 sets, I'm going to start taking 5 of those and gluing them together in a line. And we're going to do that 3 times, so we have 3 sets of the 5 pairs. Once we have all of those together, now we can start building what is going to be an arch. So you can see I have 1 along the bottom and then 2 on the sides, and then we're going to start to kind of manipulate these to curve. But since they are straight block pieces that don't exactly bend, this was a little difficult to figure out. What I ended up doing was just allowing there to be a gap between them, and then I took some of my Durham water putty, mixed that up, and then I started adding that into all of the cracks. I did hot glue them together where I could at least, and then filled in all of the cracks with my Durham's water putty. Now, I did get slightly carried away with this step and ended up filling in every single little crack and crevice there was on this entire arch. So I actually came up with this idea because I couldn't find any of those Dollar Tree arches, so I figured, why don't I make one and see if I can do it out of the Jenga blocks. Once the wood putty had dried, I took some 220 grit sandpaper and just wanted to knock off any of the big chunks of the wood putty. I did still want it to have some texture. And I apologize if you hear all kinds of background noise. It's a beautiful day, so I figured I would do my voiceover outside. I did paint the arch black, which you can see here. I kind of skipped that step. It is self-explanatory, but next I am just taking some joint compound and spreading it across the surface. So I wanted this to kind of have that German schmear type of look to it. So I wanted to have lots of texture and be able to see that black underneath. Once the joint compound was dry, now I'm just dry brushing over top of it with my mineral color chalk paint, which is like a taupey gray color, my fawn, which is like a light tan beige color, and then also with my antique Waverly wax, which is a darker brown, to give it all kinds of like distressing aged look. And that was all I did for this one. This actually is my least favorite. I don't think I completely achieved the vision I thought that this would be. And I don't think it's actually going to hold up very well because where those joints are, where that first piece arches, it's really fragile there. And I have a feeling it's just going to fall apart pretty quickly. If anyone has any thoughts on how I could have done a little better to make this stay together, let me know down in the comments.